Hi, everybody. We are getting ready to start our webinar for this afternoon, our next Behind the Taproom series with Creature Comforts Brewing Company in Athens, Georgia, which is super cool to have somebody from outside of New England now in our series. So going to get that started in just a second. I am Luci Benedict. I'm the director of the QC2 lab at the University of Southern Maine. And we decided to host these series right now since we can't get out to visit breweries and check out their labs as selfishly as a way for me to be able to see all of these really cool quality control labs out there. So I hope for those of you who have joined us in previous sessions, you're enjoying these. And for those of you who are new, welcome. I just want to give a quick intro and rundown of kind of how our webinar is structured. And then I'm going to let Spencer and Dan take it away as we go forward. So our webinar rundown, we're going to get an amazing tour of the quality lab at Creature Comforts. So it's going to be about 45 minutes. Then we're going to go into a Q&A session at the end. But please, while we're doing this, ask questions at any time. And how you ask questions is somewhere on your device, whether you're on a computer, tablet, or a phone, there is a Q&A button that you should see that looks kind of like this one right here. Click on that. You can type in your question. You can be anonymous. You can share your name. It's up to you. And then either during the session or at the end, kind of depending on how things are going, I'll read those questions over to our speakers and they'll answer them for us. If you have a question that is complicated or is too long to type, or I butcher when I'm asking or something like that, please feel free to raise your hand and then I can turn your mic on and you can speak your question. We'll leave that option for our Q&A at the end, but feel free to use it if you want to. The other feature you can use today is our chat feature. And that's for anytime you have a comment, I don't know, something like the tech isn't working, whatever it is. If you have a comment that you just want to share with us, please put that in the chat. Other than that, we'll pretty much stick with the Q&A button. The other thing I want to talk about real quick over here is a picture of the QC2 lab at the University of Southern Maine. All of these events bring attention to our lab, which is really run by undergraduate students, as well as myself and Sam White, who's our lab coordinator. And the work that the students are doing in this lab sets them up for a really interesting education. This goes beyond their typical chemistry lab experience. If you go back to your high school and college days and think about your science labs, they're probably like a cookbook, you're following directions. It may have been hard to understand how that applies to anything beyond what you're learning in the classroom. And so with the quality control collaboratory at USM, the QC2 lab, we try to create an experience for students where they get to understand what it's like to be a chemical analyst in a lab testing beer for the brewing industry, to be a researcher, to go out and work at breweries as quality assurance and quality control specialists. So it's really creating this unique experience for them. This is all supported through the funding that we get through testing and our workshops. All of that funnels back to our students and helps support the lab and the work that we're doing. So if you think about your brewery's mission and how important it is to you, our mission of educating the brewing industry and our students simultaneously is incredibly important to us. So I thank you all for being here, and I hope you think about joining our other webinars and maybe using some of our testing services in the future. And I think that both probably Dan and Spencer know from their experience how impactful these types of experiences are, because when I was snooping on their LinkedIn pages today, I noticed that Dan LePage, who's the senior quality manager there at Creature Comforts, actually has his PhD. I should be calling him Dr. LePage in biology, which is super cool. And he did undergraduate research when he was getting his bachelor's in biochemistry. So Dan, I know you've had this experience of what these students are going through. And Spencer, who's the senior quality lab specialist at Creature Comforts, went to the University of Georgia and got his bachelor's in biochemistry. So he's also probably had those types of experiences, and then he went to move on into industry before going to Creature Comfort. So hopefully you guys are both okay with me saying we've got two amazing science nerds who are now working quality control at Creature Comforts, and we get to see what they're up to. So without further ado, I'm gonna pass the mic over to our two speakers for the day. I'm gonna fade into the background like they were before I started speaking, and let them take over the show. And I'm just gonna run the slides. So thanks guys for being here, and I'll let you take over.
Awesome, thanks Lucy. So for anyone who's not familiar with Creature Comforts, just a little bit of background on who we are. We are a 7-year-old brewery founded in April of 2014, and so 7-year anniversary is coming up in just a couple weeks. Last year we did about 50,000 barrels. This year we'll do about 60,000. We have two facilities, our original downtown facility, which is a 15-barrel 4-vessel brew house, and then our current system, which is an 85-barrel 4-vessel Krone Steinecker system. So we're brewing into 340 and 120 barrel tanks here, and all of our packaging is kegs and cans with our main production facility. As far as the lab, we have 4 full-time scientists in the lab, myself, Spencer, but also Rob Schutz and Brandon Rogers. Rob came to us from Goose Island, Brandon came to us from industry beforehand. So 4 of us right now. We're going to be hiring a 5th this summer to be Athens based, and then another one that will be at the new brewery that we're building in Los Angeles, which is really fun and exciting. That'll be opening up later this year. The lab, we're a little bit unique, I found, for our size and what we do. Well, each of us has our own kind of specialty and backgrounds. My background is more microbiology. Spencer's background is more chemistry and things like that. We actually rotate our duties. So we have the lab broken down into 4 areas of focus: analytical, micro, sensory, and packaging. And we actually rotate who's in charge of different realms at different times. So someone in the lab will be on analytical 1 week, they'll be micro the next, sensory the week after that. And then actually the packaging crew does most of our packaging checks, and we just help oversee that and give them support when needed. So that's kind of the general structure of our lab. We built it to be very collaborative. We aren't, sheriffs going out and poo-pooing other departments. We'd very much help them work through issues, and they bring their problems to us, which is great. Creates a really great working environment. So just think it's fun. Quality lab is the only lab in production that interacts with every single other department, as well as every department across the company. So we really, I like the collaborative nature of QC too. It's something that we adhere to as well. But we're just going to go through kind of the 4 different realms of our lab: that analytical, microsensory, packaging, kind of take turns. And Spencer's going to get us started off with analytical. I'm not going to be moving my laptop around. We actually have some pre-recorded videos that Lucy's going to be able to play. But with that, we can start talking about the analytical realm here at Creature.
All right, I'm ready whenever you are. So this is our Haze Meter from Optech. It is, as you might guess, to measure haze. It has pretty giant cuvettes. Oh, if you want to go back a little bit and then select pause on that. Pretty giant cuvettes, degas the beer, put them in there. And we are looking at 90-degree and 11-degree measurements on light refraction to see you get a better idea of stable haze versus non-stable haze, and can narrow down causes of the haze, whether you want the haze or not. It has a kind of chamber you fill up with water, you put the cuvette in, and then the actual detector rotates around. And that helps eliminate if you have like a scratch on the cuvette or a little piece of something that might otherwise throw off the measurement. It gets a good even measurement around the entire sample. Now we can move on to the next. So circling over, we have our little battle station here. That's just the computer that is hooked up to this. That's everyone's favorite thing, the Anton Par DMA 4500. We use this kind of as the heartbeat of the brewery. It really advises our daily functions. If you want to pause it there before it moves on. Nope. DMA reads things like ABV, EA, you can do RDF, density, all kinds of things. And we're using it to make sure beer is in spec, make sure beer is not moving too quickly. pH is kind of wonky on this, but you know, if you have something severely out of spec that got infected, you would probably see it on here. One of the biggest boons here is our auto sampler off to the right there. We are running just tons of samples every day. So having the auto sampler and then prepping all the samples at once, letting them go, and then coming back to read all the results is a major help for time management. Yeah, and that's kind of it for that. Anyone in the industry has probably messed with that. This is our little UV Viz. So it's pretty robust, honestly. It has a 6 carousel tray inside, or 6 sample tray inside, 1 blank, and then 5 sample slots. You can use it for most things you would think of, which are IBUs and color, probably the most common two you'll see. But we were trying a diacetyl method with it for a while using distillation, which we never quite got into spec. We've been working on TBA testing to kind of look at thermal damage in our wort and help optimize the brewing process to extend our shelf life, do less damage to it. Let's see. We also use this for protein testing and polyphenol testings. So those two are especially good together because you might know when you have high levels of them, they will form together in giant mega complexes and then crash out into the bits. And the bits are our enemy and must be destroyed. And they just they don't alter taste or anything of the beer other than making it not pleasant to look at, really. We also can use this for fan testing, which we do every now and then to kind of get an idea of where we're sitting. Move on to the next. And so this is my main love in the lab, is the GC. As you can see, it has a little screen, lets you put memes on it. So we try to change out the memes each week, make sure we have something good up for everyone. Right now, we just have a can of Reclaimed Rye on there, which is our best beer that no one will drink. But overall, our biggest uses, we have GC, ECD, and mass spec all on here. The ECD we use daily to check diacetyl levels in all our beers, or not all our beers, but many of our beers, to decide when to crash them once they get to a certain stage. The mass spec is kind of a jack of a bunch of trades that we're working on developing still. COVID hit right after we got this installed, so we've been running a lean crew most of this full year now and have been developing methods, just not as quickly as we would like. But some of the things we use it for, looking at aging compounds, is kind of our biggest push to get an analytical timeline of how our beers age over time, instead of relying solely on sensory of different people who might see things a little differently between different beers. We're working on methods right now for just general volatile quantitation, working on screening terpenes in hops, and I have a couple other things I want to look at that I've not started yet, really. But those who might not know, I guess, the mass spec basically takes molecules, shoots them with electrons, and breaks them down into little pieces. And then those pieces hit a plate in different areas depending on their mass to charge ratio. And that helps it identify all the different pieces at different times. Yes, and so based on those pieces, you can then build back up to figure out what molecules you have going through your column and onto your mass spec detector. And then we move on from there in a little bit. Let's get some glamour shots here. The autosampler we have is a Tri-Plus RSH. We have headspace capabilities, and we also have an iTex in-house right now to get some of the more sensitive compounds, ideally. That basically is a thermal trap for anyone who hasn't messed around with that. Similar to SPME, but more of it's a empty tube that you're taking those molecules into and then eluting after absorbing them to the column. And then this is just kind of a readout of what you see each day on the diacetyl curve. This is a particularly high batch of trop on diacetyl, which is probably right after dry hop or something. We often see a giant spike and then comes back down shortly thereafter.
Yeah, so that's the analytical side of the lab. Basically, anything that we can really put a hard number to is probably falling under analytical. After that, we have the micro side of the lab. So this is a dedicated room in our lab. It's we can quarantine it off to help with the airflow and everything like that. But yeah, this is kind of the battle station for whoever's doing micro that week. We have an Exelon X2 automated cell counter, a lot of fun, like it quite a lot. And then Quant Studio 3 for our qPCR testing. Actually developed our own protocol. If you want to look it up, presented on it last year at WBC. Nexelon was great. We love it, especially moving into having a facility on the West Coast. These things, they save the pictures anywhere you want. And so we'll actually be able to help the West Coast facility by looking at all their counts and everything visually here if they run into any issues or stuff like that. It's been a lot of fun to use. Highly recommend it. The micro program in general is kind of broken down into two pillars, just like everyone else, you know, keeping yeast health in mind, but also checking for contamination. We have our incubator next to our qPCR there. And it's just a regular incubator. For our anaerobic incubation, we are using actual sealed chambers. We used to use the gas packs. They're really expensive, so you can't really see the labeling. We have one of those tubs there is labeled cheapo gas packs, and actually hot hands are the exact same reaction and costs a lot less. So we're creating anaerobic environment with those hot hands, and we have little indicators for all of our anaerobic testing as well. So all of our micro testing will be done both aerobically and anaerobically, every single sample. And then on top of that, LSI, you know, we have our laminar flow hood where we're doing all of our plating and prepping the samples and things like that. And then we also have just our general kind of microscope station and pipetting area. And so that's where we're checking the bugs underneath the scope and doing all of our yeast count preps and PCR prep and stuff like that. We do use some handy techniques. If we get a scary hit on a plate, we'll send it off for sequencing. We can send off a plate for sequencing to figure out the actual species. If we're sending off a plate, we'll send it to GeneWiz. You get an answer in about 4 or 5 days. We can also use our qPCR machine to actually run PCR against 16S or ITS regions, depending on its bacteria yeast, and get next day sequencing results on any kind of particularly scary hits. As long as we get it into a Dropbox by 5 p.m., they get us results by noon the next day, and that's through GeneWiz or Eurofins. We put out a webinar on some of those techniques if anyone's interested, but we found it to be really, really helpful if we get any hits that we need to act on very quickly. So yeah, that's the general micro program. So anyone who starts in analytical, they'll be on micro the next week. And after that, they move to sensory. But before that, we've got packaging. Spencer can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so this is our lovely Crohn's craftmate. That's Steve. He's setting it up to run a little bit slower for us for a second so that we can look at the cans nicely. It's 24 fill head filler, and it has been pretty great for the most part. Keeps our oxygen levels much lower than a 4-head wild goose, it turns out. So what we have on here right now is actually our collaboration with Sierra Nevada we did this year. We do Get Comfortable each year, and it's a charity beer to benefit some organizations in Athens and Atlanta. Switching over here, it's a little choppy just because of Zoom, but you can see the cans going down their line, and then it'll head over to the switchback there that Camille is on, putting these into 4, 6, or 12 packs, depending on what we're looking at. This is the packaging table. So this is where we do all the kind of packaging checks. So working from left to right, we just have the computer that everything talks to. We have our CMC, if you want to just go back to the table shot. We have our CMC, I think it's a Visionary, I believe it's called. But it is basically a 2-part system. One part is a little saw, or a pair of saws that push into the can seam when you press down upside down on the slot, and that lets you push in the can. And then the other part is a camera. So you turn it upside down and press it up against the camera, and you get a very, very detailed picture of the actual side of the seam. And that helps us make sure that we have nice tight seams, nothing's kind of poking through another part or too loose. Measure things like body hook, cover hook, overlap of the two. It gives you a nice detailed report. Then we have our shaker table for shaking up cans to take DO. We use a Hawk Orbisphere 3100. We have 2 in that brewery that we use for oxygen readings. We like the Hawk quite a bit because you can basically do whatever you want to it. It's pretty robust. It stands up to brewers and cellar people, which is impressive for any device in a brewery. And if there is something wrong, we have the ability to actually take it apart and kind of get in there and diagnose. We've only had to send it off once for any real reason in the past quite a few years that I can think of. And that was because just a connection inside was loosened to the point that we could not fix it. So we sent it off, they fixed it, sent it back, and it's been great ever since. In the back right there, that is another CMC device. That is what we used to use for part of our seam checks. So it is basically a modified drill press. It has a little piece that spins, and when you press it down onto the can, as though you were drilling into the center of it, it just grinds the lid off, and then you can pull the cover hook off and then check the sizes of the body hook and cover hook, and then you can, from that, calculate what your overlap would be. And so that was our old method of doing checks. That will lead us on to sensory.
So last thing we're going to see here is kind of our sensory booths. Unfortunately, we haven't actually used these for over a year, but we do consider sensory to be our most important quality check at the end of the day. You know, the ASBC lists over 350 different methods that you can run on raw materials, beer and process, finished product. But at the end of the day, you have to know what it tastes like. So we have a fully trained panel of 24 panelists. We focus, it's largely centered on production. Just because those are the people who are right there near the lab, can come to panel easily. Currently, we've been running 2 separate panels, one at our main production facility and one at our downtown facility. And we actually set it up for those so we don't have people, a bunch of people bopping back and forth between facilities. And we're just using disposable cups on case trays and the little like 2 cracker packs, everything like that. So it's all as sanitary as we can be. So this is the lab side. We have 4 booths that we just call A, B, C, and D. We have little indicator lights. Typically on panel, we're running anywhere from, but it's usually 5 to 6 beers. Right now, we only run panel twice a week. That's quickly going to 3 times a week. And also, we're instituting a dedicated hop sensory panel, actually this month, that we've spent a lot of time developing in coordination with YCH, which has been a lot of fun. And so when it comes to sensory, we put folks through an 8-course training program. It covers how to evaluate beer, what's true to brand for our core beers, how to identify 27 different defects in beer. We go over at least 30 different aroma descriptors. We go over, we have our own in-house oxidation scale that we built. It's on a scale from 1 to 10. We call 5 our maximum allowable market. And we train people on that. We train them how to evaluate specialty brands, you know, something that isn't a core brand for us, but just a creature beer in general. And then all of our panelists, that course, over that 8-session course, they will actually evaluate over 200 different samples that we put in front of them. And then the people who pass the course are invited to earn a spot on our official panel. The panel is evaluated in 3 areas: attendance, and then we also purposely spike beers and adulterate them, and we expect our panelists to fail those spikes, and we also expect them to identify what the spike is. So they're also scored on whether they fail those beers and whether they correctly identify the adulteration. Those adulterations run the gamut. You know, we could be messing with the aroma, with the appearance. We could be putting a completely different brand in front of them. One of my favorite ones is repetition, to put the same beer in front of them multiple times, and they have to evaluate it the exact same way either time, otherwise they fail the spike. And kind of keeps them on their toes. They get really competitive about it. We've got a nice little board out front showing who our top panelists were in the last year and also in last month and stuff like that. The folks who do really well, you know, they're invited to become an official part of our panel. Since we're only doing panel a couple times a week, sometimes we are actually packaging beer before it's gone in front of our official sensory panel. Not ideal, but we do have it instituted where any beer before it goes into any package, kegs, cans, whatever, has to be cleared by 3 official sensory panelists. And if a single one of those panelists fails that beer is put on hold. It cannot be packaged that day. It has to wait to go to the official panel. And it's really handy having most of our panelists on production side, and actually the packaging crew is kind of the heart of our sensory panel. So if we have enough people on site to package beer, we probably have enough people on site to clear that beer as well. It hasn't really been an issue for us. So that's kind of the core of our sensory program. We're also very, very focused on freshness, and it's one of the things that sets us apart in our market. We try to keep our beer very, very fresh, and so the in-house oxidation scale helps a lot. We know how long our beer can sit on a shelf warm and things like that, and actually our sales crew will check at every single account, every single one of our SKUs or brands that's sitting on the shelf, and they have a phone app and they log the date that it was packaged. And so we have a live read on all the accounts that our sales folks are visiting every single day, and how old our beer is on the shelf. And we can click through it on the map. We can see accounts that might be at risk or that we need to visit again, or maybe send less beer to next time, stuff like that. And it's been an absolute game changer for us. We've had it for years, and we're able to see exactly what our beer is like in the market at all times. And that's kind of the sensory realm. That's it for the lab. So I think just the last clip we have is Party Lab. Might notice the fun lights behind me. We rock Party Lab every Friday, at least, sometimes more if we need it. And this is just a general overview of the whole lab. It's a fairly small space square footage wise, but I feel we cram a lot of capabilities into it, and it's going to be real good to get everyone back inside at the same time. So you can see kind of going around everything over to the micro room, and so just transition back to the view from outside. That's our lab.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for giving us that sneak peek into your lab. I'm going to stop sharing for a little bit, and we'll open it up to questions and answers. So audience, ask your questions for these two now. Think about them, type them in. While we wait, one of the things I realized as soon as I disappeared off the screen and muted myself, I did not share that you guys sent me some amazing beer. Thank you so much. I'm drinking the Athena Paradiso. Is that how you say it? It's a Berliner Weiss. It's a German style tart wheat ale with fruit, and it's really good. And I'm not always like a fruity beer type person, but this is really good. So, and it's only 4.5, so perfect for like something like this.
Yeah, thank you. Glad you like it. That's a fun one. We do a lot of Kettle Sours here at Creature. We're actually doing at least one 85 barrel batch of Kettle Sour every single week, sometimes multiple batches. Actually, we're almost always going to be doing multiple batches now because we moved the second one to a core brand. And we use it's a house lactobacillus culture. We know the species that it started off as. It is no longer that. I've done 16S sequencing on it. I've done full genomic sequencing on it. We're hoping to publish sometime soon on Lactobacillus creatura. And in 5 or 6 years, when it mutates again, we'll have Lactobacillus comfortiti. But we've just been serial repitching it for 7 years. And we regularly kettle sour our beers down to the target acidity in less than 4 hours. And we can actually hit less than 2 hours if the culture is very fresh. So yeah, kettle sours are something we're passionate about. We like them a lot.
Well, you're definitely doing them right. So thank you for, at least my opinion, thank you for sending that down. We've got our first question. It's a long one, but a good one. So bear with me for a second. And there's a lot of pieces to it. So let me know if you need me to reread it. But this is from Thomas. He says, can you tell a bit about what you know about how different levels, concentrations of polyphenols affect beer? In what kind of beers, hoppy, roasty, do you see higher numbers, concentration of polyphenols? Do you sometimes see high variation of polyphenols from one batch to another for the same beer? What are your flavor threshold maximum concentrations in IPAs, New England IPAs? I've heard Russian River has a 10 ppm max concentration for their IPAs. Do you know what seems to cause the most problems, higher levels of polyphenols with regards to ingredients and process in brewing? For example, pH of wort and boil, dry hop with T90 versus cryo, dry hop contact time, temperature, pH. So basically tell us everything you know about polyphenols.
Yeah, I wish I could answer all of those questions competently. They're all really great questions. We don't have an internal spec for polyphenols. We have traced it throughout the process to kind of see where things are picking up. It's a pretty, fairly intense test, so it's not one that we do a lot. The biggest pickups that we found are going to be coming from how your lauter is treated, keeping a close eye on lauter pH and last runnings and stuff like that, cutting it off before it gets too high is going to help a lot. It's also affected by how good a true drop you get in the whirlpool. And then we see a lot of pickup with the dry hop. We actually haven't looked into effects of T90 versus cryo. So it'd be really interesting to do. We've slowly we were using a lot of cryo. We're slowly shifting back to using more T90 in our brewery. We've actually found that overall it's helped with efficiencies, which is kind of crazy because one of the selling points for cryo is that it helps with efficiencies. But with our system and our techniques, we found T90 is actually slightly better in a lot of cases. Yeah, so we don't really have a spec for it. It is much higher in our hoppy beers. When it comes to the polyphenol protein complexes, honestly, the best and most effective way we found for fighting those is Clarex. So if we have hoppy beers, we'll actually be adding Clarex to prevent bits. We found that the bits, they only form in package when it's been cold stored for at least 10 days. So it's something that really sucks. You won't notice it until the beer's already in consumers' hands. You don't notice it in the bright. You don't notice it when you're packaging. It does take at least 10 days of cold storage for them to form and start falling out of solution. So that was something that we had an issue with several years ago, and we switched and started using Clarex, and that's actually solved that problem for us.
And then speaking to, as far as variation goes, from batch to batch, it's pretty consistent overall. I was doing a lot of testing back when we were first seeing the bits pop up before we kind of moved to Clarex as a Band-Aid, hopefully for now. But batch to batch, you'd see much less variation for such an involved procedure with such a pain of a reagent that is the CMC reagent. It's carboxymethylcellulose. And so it's just really hard to dial in an exact volume on that. It's very thick, as you might imagine, as cellulose solution to be, that takes like 2 days to dissolve. But that said, that test actually gets pretty decent precision, I found.
Excellent. Thanks for those great answers on that very big question. Next question comes from Jeremy Cross, who's also a co-collaborator of mine down over there at Jack's Abbey, and he's asking a question which makes me chuckle, because this is actually how we all got connected together, was through this compound, or these set of compounds, tetrahydropyridines, right? When Zach Boda, Allagash, and brought us together to talk about trying to analyze these suckers. So Jeremy asks, I read an article about a year ago where you all were discussing THP. There's a lot we don't know about it. Have you made any new discoveries about THP since that article was written? Which I also like to call the Dorito bomb in the beer.
Yeah, it's a fun one. Yeah, so we found, oddly, for us, there are two things that correlate strongly with THP formation in bottle conditioned mixed culture beers. But hey, we have our own house mixed culture. It is solely, we've done full metagenomic sequencing on it. It is Brettanomyces and Pediococcus. We actually don't have any lactobacillus in our house mixed culture, if anyone's curious. But we found the two biggest correlations to THP are oxygen ingress. During packaging, we saw our THP drop dramatically whenever we got a new bottling line, a very nice bottling line instead of a hand bottling line. It was a game changer, except for one particular brand. So the correlations we found are oxygen and peaches. No idea why, but actually it's one of Spencer's projects with the GC that he can talk a little bit about.
Yeah, so this is why I initially reached out to Allagash, Zach Boda at Allagash, who then brought Luci in, and that's how we met Luci, luckily. And is something I would like to look at with the GC and mass spec. One of the things we were thinking about was looking at it with the ACD on Luci's suggestion. The only problem has been we haven't done a lot of mixed culture bottling recently, and then the ones we have done haven't had a lot of THP. It is a hard compound to get a hold of as far as an analytic standard goes as well. And then on top of not knowing, there's various forms that people all say are the cause. So it's just the elusiveness of needing to have a THP bomb of a beer that I can then do screens and screens and screens on to figure out which ones are actually causing the problem for us. And then actually have time to narrow it down and then look more into it. So it's kind of at a, not stopping point, but hiatus-ish, just waiting for the right opportunity to be able to really hack away at it. But yes, we have a beer called Pearson, which uses fresh peaches, and that beer is a nightmare of THP to the point where it became something about the peaches just really accentuate any character of that THP. So even just having the base beer, once it's gone, I just have kind of little flashbacks to THP coming through super hard early on.
THP is it's such an unknown. It cracks me up. I forgot about the peaches. When we talked, and then I kind of got back on the THP train, research for a while, and it's hard. I think since there's no questions yet, if anybody asks a question, go ahead and I'll stop chatting. But it's a really interesting piece because there are these 3 compounds that are potential ones to be giving this flavor that's I don't know, it smells like Doritos to me, but it's like crackers or mousy. I don't get the mousy, but there's no standards out there, and there are very few papers that are out there. Everybody who got standards got it from one guy. So if anybody knows the guy, please let Spencer and I know, because we'd love to get his compounds. We were able to synthesize it in the lab, but not very pure, and never got it to show up from beer. So we could get the analyte to show up from the synthesized compound, but can never find it in beer. I don't know if the levels are just so low, or maybe it's the other compounds or what, but it's tricky. So when Spencer figures it out, I can't wait to study it more. So yeah, it's tricky for sure.
So if you do have a THP bomb of a beer, put it in the cooler immediately and then send it to us.
Exactly. That's the other tricky part, right? Because you can't, I beg people, if you get THP in your beer, please send it to us. But yeah, what other questions do people have for these guys? I know as Spencer, oh, no, never mind. I'll stop. Because Thomas has another question for you. How is your water treated? Are you doing any tests on your water? I have heard that TDS is a relevant value. A relevant value. Is that a parameter your brewery pays attention to?
Yeah, so we have a couple different water sources. It's interesting. We're pulling all of our water from the city at either facility. At our smaller downtown facility, we carbon filter it, and that's it. That is the extent of our water treatment. Here at the main production facility, we carbon filter it, and then we run it through RO. So all of our processed water here is RO, and then we'll just build it back up to exactly what we need. The TDS, it's interesting. Actually, we're working with the city right now. So for folks who don't know, that's total dissolved solids. We are working with the city right now on a wastewater treatment plan, as far as whether we need to install a wastewater treatment plant on our side, or help pay them, for the kind of the extra labor that our sludge is causing them when we put it down the drain. And so we haven't really done a whole lot of TDS testing. It is a tricky one. It's pretty variable depending on what you're comparing it to and your methods and stuff like that. You'll also hear it kind of, the oxygen demand, BOD, is a big one for any kind of waste treatment facility. They're worried about BOD coming in and how it's going to hit their reactors and stuff like that. So it's not something we've done a whole lot of, but we are going to have to be moving towards that because we are going through a waste water treatment plan with the city. As far as general water testing, we have a small handheld Hawk spectrometer that has a lot of these little water kits that you can use to test for hardness and manganese and copper and iron and sulfates and chlorine and free chlorine and all that sort of stuff. And we can use that on a monthly basis to check our water. And then also on a quarterly basis, we're sending our water off to an outside lab to get all of our testing verified as well. And then if we're particularly interested in certain metals and stuff like that, in either water or beer, we actually work with a lab at the University of Georgia to do ICP OES testing to look at any kind of metal concentrations, if that's what we're interested in.
Excellent. Next question comes from Jeremy. Considering you will have a brewery on each coast, what are some of the difficulties you are running into with regards to making sure the beer coming out of Athens tastes as close as possible to the beer coming out of LA? And I could see this being a big challenge, right? I know we've had breweries who have had their breweries in a rural area on well water and then wanted to open a brewery in the city, and completely different water, completely different beers. So I would imagine two coasts, probably a challenge.
Yeah, we actually were having discussions about that today. So the LA facility isn't open yet. We're in the final phases right now before actually starting construction. We just had like meetings out there to get community approval and stuff like that. But it should be opening probably in October of this year. That's when we're targeting first wort. We are going to have RO at that facility as well. So that helps a lot, bring our water down to a base level. The water in LA is rough. Everything we've heard from fellow brewers out there and everything like that, they're like, oh yeah, the water, not so great. So having RO out there is going to help a lot, bring it down to a base level. It's going to be nice as well. We're actually, we are going to be training. There are several folks here who might head out to LA. We already have our brewmaster for LA, and we're going to be actually putting them through our sensory training program here and making sure that we'll actually have a sensory panel firing on all cylinders as soon as we open on the West Coast. Also super excited in that the way we've been able to do the design, we're actually doing a copy paste of our sensory booths here on the East Coast over to the West Coast. So our panelists there will be evaluating beer in the exact same environment. everything is going to be the same. It's going to be great. And then also we plan on having beer sent back to here at Athens to our mother panel and our core panel, make sure that it's still staying in line.
Excellent. That sounds like quite the challenge for you all, but exciting. I do hear Portland, Maine has really good water, just in case eventually. I mean, I know we've got a lot of great breweries, but could always use another one. Two questions are coming up. I'll read them one at a time. First question, can you elaborate on your sensory program a bit more?
Yeah, sure. If there's anything particular someone wants to know, let me know. We've been running the program almost since day one. So we do consider sensory to be the most important test that we do in the lab. As far as training and stuff like that, we have moved. We were using the Eroxa pills for a little while. We have, and since then, brought in our own in-house chemicals, so we can use those to train our folks. Okay, small brewery must-dos. Yeah. So training. We are really big on training. If people aren't evaluating beer consistently and in the same way and confidently, then you put shit in, you get shit out. So we really focus on training, and we have our own validation sheet that we use to score panelists. If anyone wants access to that, we're more than happy to share it. Can show you how it works. It's just an Excel file. As far as the actual data management, we are using DraftLab. Like it a lot. There are some things would like to change about it, but in general, it's been really great. It's very easy to set up. It does a lot of statistics for you and things like that. You're able to track stuff over time. But as far as small breweries, I think it's really important, training, buying the Eroxa pills one set, it's pretty expensive, but it can really help in really figuring out as far as like, what are the things that are relevant to your beer. So we focus on the stuff that, the possible defects that we've seen pop up in the past, or that we want our panelists to focus on. So freshness is a big one for us. So that's why one of the 8 classes that we put people through is all about oxidation, all about aging, because that's a big focus of ours. So choosing what you want them to be focused on, keeping them trained, keeping them on their toes, and then just determining, what you want your checks to be. The pre-packaging check is huge for us. Highly recommend it. Someone needs to be tasting the beer before it goes in the package, because before it's in package, there are all kinds of things you can do, but once it's in cans or kegs, that's kind of it. So the pre-packaging checks are really important, and something that we rely a lot on. Yeah, so those are some of the things that we do.
Yeah, with training as well, one of the things we've been moving to, other than just training on the actual beer throughout our class, is making sure we get things like grain samples, hop samples, and then we've been working with actually just different things that we use as descriptors. So this last class, we would put 5 descriptors on or so each panel, and that'd be things like candy or fruit juices or chopped up fruit or different grass types that we often use as descriptors. And we're hoping that kind of helps people make those links a bit better, because you'll get people that haven't been through much in the way of drinking beer or having to really describe the flavors behind it or aromas behind it. And an IPA is just kind of hoppy, but it's, we look for different intricacies in the hops, and that helps them kind of connect those things to, it's kind of like watermelon or lemongrass or hay, and just what they're getting out of it instead of just hops or sweet or malt or something.
Thanks. I think that's a really helpful answer for small breweries and how they can add in sensory and build their programs. It's interesting to see how each program is kind of different too.
We've also had a lot of luck with kind of gamifying the sensory program. One thing that you see breweries run into is it can be really hard to keep people passionate about sensory and keep them coming to sensory panel, and attendance is really important. You want your panelists to be drinking your beers on a regular basis. If they aren't, then how can they tell it's true to brand if they didn't have that brand for a month or two? And so we've kind of gamified it with the scores, and we post the scores after every panel for the most recent 90 days. Everyone can see it. They have like their anonymized numbers. Everyone still kind of knows who each other is. We're rolling out a program called Sensory Royalty. So we're going to have big cutout faces of everyone and who did the best, you know, the gold crown, silver crown, bronze crown, you know, for the last month. We're also going to be instituting a thing that we're calling Powerball Panel. So panels will be able to come to a special panel and fight for gift cards and stuff like that. It's going to be a lot of fun, but gamifying it. And then one thing that also I haven't really seen other breweries do, but we do, and it helps keep them engaged a lot, is after every sensory panel, we send out 2 emails. One is to upper leadership and you know, folks who are making decisions across production and marketing and sales and stuff like that. And it just tells them the results for the day, and also has in-depth lab analysis. It has all the panelists' comments, failure percentages, it has everything. And then we send out a second email to the panelists, and it's a trimmed out version. You know, we don't want to tell everyone everything. It would freak them out if everyone knew everything that was going wrong. But we do tell them in general, like, hey, you know, this beer, you know, panelists said it was a little bit more bitter than usual. So maybe that person who said, oh, this isn't bitter enough, they know, oh, maybe I'm out of line a little bit. I need to recalibrate my palate. And it also helps if there's any action that came from it, be like, hey, this beer got knocked around on panel, and because of that, we're instituting a blend and blah, 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 blah. We're doing this. We tell them if there's any action that came from panel. That way they know that their opinions matter. And also, most of our panelists are on production anyways. They're going to know. They're going to be the ones blending the beer. They're going to be the ones taking the action. So there's no real point in hiding that information from them. And it helps keep them engaged, be like, hey, your opinion matters. And because you said this, we did whatever.
Well, that's really interesting. I always in my world forget that there is so much beyond quality control than the lab work that goes on, right? And the sensory and building that program and engaging those people is that's really cool. We got 2 more questions. One question: hard water X on haze retention in beer? Question mark.
Yeah, we haven't really done much on that. I don't really know much about it myself. I don't know if Spencer could speak to anything he might know.
Not really. It's not something I've looked much into, since we are stripping it down to nothing and then building it back up. Ideally, it shouldn't really be affecting us unless our RO filter and carbon filter just aren't pulling their weight. And we've not really, I don't think we've seen any glaring issues of that. So it's not something I've read into, but I should.
Excellent. Always nice when there's something you don't have to worry about, right? Question from Tom: are you doing any tests on concentration of ions such as calcium, magnesium, chloride, copper in wort pre-pitch or in final beer? Not a laboratory person, but curious to know if that is something you measure. And funny enough, we've had quite a few questions lately about zinc, magnesium, and calcium, which are things we're working on testing too. So interested to hear what you guys do.
That's a great one for Spencer.
Yeah. So yes, Daniel mentioned earlier the UGA plasma center that runs ICP OES for us. So we actually will take samples every now and then and send them off there. They give us a 2020 elemental breakdown that you choose, 22. But yeah, so we've looked at different things. Let me go back to look at the specific elements, but yeah, magnesium, zinc, copper, iron are kind of a lot of the biggest ones, I think, for oxidation and then off flavor. So last year at ASBC, we did a presentation specifically about metal in Kettle Sours, because we found that every now and then we were getting metallic taste in our Kettle Sours. And so we dive into the process of really going through, working with that plasma center and sending off samples to them to get just constant readbacks on different parts, all the way from mash down to like canned beer that's been aged for a while, and really figure out where we were getting different pickups of different things. We've definitely monitored other elements for pickup in other places, but haven't really had a huge issue that needs addressing as much as we did originally with the iron.
Yeah, we'll say with we kind of spoke about it a little bit. We have a big project right now trying to increase the shelf life of our beers. So we're especially interested in some of those transitional metals that can form ROS in beer. So we are looking more in manganese, magnesium, copper, iron, stuff like that. We'll say one of the things that really helped us as far as yeast health was really dialing in our zinc concentrations. We are doing zinc dosing. We autoclave it. We get the dose, we autoclave it in the lab, we give it to the brewers, and they are doing it on the cold side, actually, down in the cellar. We have a little manifold thing with valves that they can put it in this little U area and then switch the valves. Wort will go through the U, pick up the zinc, and then onto the fermenter. If you do it on hot side, it almost all drops out with the hop tube in the whirlpool. We also saw the tube takes out a lot of other metals too. It takes out like 15% of the iron and some other stuff. So that's a handy trick, but it's really annoying if you're trying to put metal in your beer like zinc. We also found we were sending the samples off to an outside lab that wasn't UGA. It was an outside brewery focused lab. And the numbers we got back from them were completely incomprehensible. And we actually traced it back to, they just told us, hey, just put it in whatever vessel, get it to us. And turns out that's a bad idea. And UGA corrected us on that, especially zinc. If you're trying to dial in your zinc concentrations, it can bind to glass. If you store it in glass or something like that, you will come back with 0 almost every time you send it off for testing. We told the outside lab, they're like, huh, that's weird. Tell us if it keeps going. We're like, okay, well, we don't know if they're even handling the samples correctly on their end. That's when we moved to UGA. We'll say they're fantastic. They're really helpful people. They've been amazing. If anyone wants to send them samples, let us know. We can get you connected. They charge only $40 a sample. You'll get results back in like a week. And they told us that we need to be using these special tubes that when leach or like remove or leave metal iron or metal ions. So we did a whole lot of work basically with iron and zinc. It's something that now we've got pretty dialed, so it's not a super regular test for us, but we have done a lot of it in the past to really get our specifications laid out.
Nice. So we have one more question for you. What's at Creature's current practice to monitor hop creep, testing VDK, gravities during DH, I assume? What are you seeing for a timeline to clear VDK after dry hopping?
Yeah, Spencer could probably speak a little bit about the VDK clearance numbers, but our general procedure at Creature, for our main yeast, we use WLP 002 and WLP 833. Those are our ale and our lager yeast. And then our hazies, we use a lot of WLP 008. We've used to use Imperial Organics 838. We like 008 a little bit better. We found it doesn't lead to bitterness in some beers. But our general dry hop procedure, depending on the brand, is to dry hop on either day 4 or 5. We're harvesting yeast the day before that, so we're getting our ale yeast off, and then dry hopping. We actually have a brand right now, Automatic. We have been dry hopping on day 4, and it has been crashing on day 5 in the fermentation. We are also adding ALDC. We'll add a little bit in the wort stream. We found with Automatic, it really helps to add it after the dry hop. Spoke to another very large brewery, and they done some testing as far as adding it in the wort stream or adding it post dry hop. They quite like adding it post dry hop. They found they had better results. And then we have a centrifuge at both facilities, and so we centrifuge all of our beers, and we found that we can centrifuge out all the yeast to the point where we won't get any kind of movement, either diacetyl, gravity, what have you, anything in package. Even if the beer is still moving gravity-wise when we crash it. And so as soon as the beer hits our target gravity and is clear on VDK, we will crash it no matter how much it moved in the last 24 hours, spin out all the yeast, and we've done loads and loads and loads of testing. It's still incredibly stable in package. Like on the lab side, it was terrifying when we started doing that, but it's worked. It's worked great, honestly. So Automatic, it's pale ale for us. Yeah, it's crashing on day 5 right now. Our core IPA Tropicalia has been, we dry hop it on day 5. It's typically clearing diacetyl within 24-48 hours after dry hop, and then we're just kind of waiting for it to get down to target gravity, and it's crashing typically day 8, day 9 right now.
Yeah, just to back that up, once we were having some yeast issues, and once we really got it bolstered and happy and healthy right after dry hop, it's been like just clearing BDK, or what our internal standard for BDK is, which has been great. We do have some other yeasts that we'll see, 008 that we use for some of our hazies and stuff, just kicks up a ton after dry hop. And so we're working kind of with the full VDK method on the GC, which is reading potential VDK or total potential, since it's converting all the precursors into diacetyl or pentanedione. But we also made a method to look at just what is there right now in those two. And that helps us kind of determine the timeline on how long it's taking to clear up. And again, just getting yeast happy and healthy has been the biggest thing we've found, that they seem to chew up diacetyl real quick, or VDKs real quick, when they're doing well.
Excellent. Well, from some of our viewers, they obviously love your beer from the comments that I hope both of you can see. But other than that, I think we have one more question to pop up, which I'll throw at both of you in just a second. If you don't mind staying on for a couple seconds or a couple more minutes. If anybody else has some questions, feel free to pop them in. But also mindful that we're at 5:04 actually. But I just wanted to thank you before everybody kind of goes on with their day, both of you, for being here, and to let all of our viewers know that we have recorded this session and we'll be sharing the video with everybody who's registered, and it'll be on our YouTube page. So feel free to share that out. And yeah, other than that, we'll stick around to answer a couple questions. But if people have to get on with their day, I totally understand. It's been super informative and super cool lab. So giving us some ideas for lighting in the future. So next question, what is your most selling New England IPA? And do you know the pitch rate as cells per mil per Plato you use?
Yeah, I don't know the actual numbers off the top of my head. If I had to, as far as the best selling one, if I had to guess, I would say it's probably Duende. It's one that we just released again for this year. We do one big release of it every year. Fantastic beer. For that one, we use WLP008, and we pitch it at 1 million per mil per degree Plato. Sometimes when we were using A38, we were using a 0.8 pitch rate, but with 008, we've been using a 1 million even pitch rate, and it's been working really well for us.
Yeah, and we do 1.5 for our lagers as well, and 1 for our 002 strains.
Oh, and actually 1.5 on our ales for our Kettle Sours. We found we have to add more yeast to actually hit our ABV specs.
Well, for the moment, that's all the questions we have. I think, unless there's another one that pops up, but thanks for doing this. This was a lot of fun. And every time we talk, I'm like, oh, I'm jealous you're in Georgia because the weather is amazing. But we actually have finally good weather, so it's not good down there, Spencer.
I like the cold, so you get that for like some of December and some of January, I feel like, here, and then it's back up to the 90s or 100s or whatever. So.
Oh my God.
Oh, I will say one thing I forgot to mention on our sensory program. Part of our validation sheet when we're tracking our panelists and scoring them, we actually are historically, we know how they performed on every single spike we've ever issued. And so we know who our strongest diacetyl tasters are, our strongest mercaptan, our strongest isovaleric. So we use that to build out, our BDK clearance list for tasters who can authorize BDK clearance for beers if we're not running them on GC. If we have a particular issue that we're worried about, we know who's most sensitive to it, who we can turn to. We'll have that historical spike or historical data for every single spike we've ever issued to the panelists.
Excellent. Any other last thoughts? Any like last bits of info you want to share with our attendees?
I would just say, like Daniel mentioned early on, being in the QC lab at a beer company has been really great for collaboration and collaborative spirit, like how we met you. So if anyone ever has questions or wants to just talk about something, we always really like talking to other people and when people reach out. And then, yeah, we're happy to do that kind of stuff. We have a thermo GCMS, which has been nice working with Luci since she has the mirror system to it. So we can send protocols back and forth and compare results a bit more easily.
And we're hiring for 2 lab people this summer. If anyone likes the lab and they want to work at Creature, Creature's a fantastic company, takes care of its people well, takes care of the community really, really well. And we're going to be bringing in 2 more scientists this summer.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. I'll share kind of our final wrap-up screen, and we'll let you 2 go on with your day. So thank you so much for taking this time, and I look forward to working with you both in the future. If anybody has questions about the webinar, feel free to email the lab. We can send these emails along if you don't have their email addresses or you can't find them, and we'll be sending a recording of this out probably within a week. So thanks.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks everyone.